So the next thing I want to get into are elemental conditions, or more specifically battlefield conditions, even though I will talk more at length about elemental conditions in the game. I think that there have been great improvements within the last year over the state of elemental conditions, and I do want to see this continue, and I do like these small experiments that seem to be happening, especially like with fire elemental conditional battlefield condition as of recent. Now, what you'll see here in the background footage is sabotage footage where you basically create the elemental conditions as you try to leave. However, I wanted to get radiation footage and dense fog footage and things like that, and what I came to realize on my PS4 account, where I could get that footage from the sorties because my PC account isn't up to snuff, was that instead of, I thought they were backtracking on what they were doing with radiation, making it pockets of radiation here and there instead of just the battlefield's irradiated. If there's an ash, you're fucked. Instead, what's happened is, since there was no dense fog when I tried to get that footage today for this video, this segment, and what kind of made me decide to re-record this, was that the effects don't seem to be displaying on console since our most recent update, so I promptly reported that in the feedback category, or the bug report category, so hopefully that gets taken care of for us. Anyway, so I like what they're doing with radiation. I like this kind of brief experiment we saw with fire conditionals, where there was a very short period where the fire conditional was cutting health in half. That was interesting from the dynamic that cold was cutting shields in half. But, of course, they seem to backtrack on that. DE seemed to backtrack on that idea because your health for a lot of frames and a lot of kind of mid-game players who still rely on those health mods are, well, basically how you survive and how you keep fighting. So that I think was smart to backtrack on. And then comparatively with Long Shadow, I got carried on Long Shadow on PC. I was at Mars at that point, and now I'm up to Neptune, so I really do think I'm going to make it in time for the release of The War Within with that account, and I might even make a spoof trailer for that, but we'll see. So anyway, getting back into it, Long Shadow on PC, the survival where the ship was on fire, it spread way too rapidly, and basically every room you were in, you would just spontaneously light on fire, and you had to try to survive through it. And that's cool. This idea of an added survival condition is very cool. However, what they did was they improved upon it. Basically, once it got to consoles, it didn't really take that long. Once it got to us on console, we saw that this condition would kind of eventually creep through the rooms of the survival. Now, what I do hope for this, what we might see, is that this might occur on some of the standard in-game survivals, and it's not just a specialty feature of events or sorties where you basically have to survive for 10 minutes and the fire creeps across the ship throughout those 10 minutes. I really would like to see it where the fire is kind of circulating throughout the ship and you have to circulate ahead of it to keep yourself from spontaneously combusting. Now, in the background footage, I do want to comment that I should have cut that video where I was exploring the height of the reactors, but it didn't happen. So, anyway, I like that they were experimenting with this and that they seem to have landed on a happy medium where it's not just you have to wander through these fire patches if it's going to be any danger to you whatsoever. I think that's very cool, and I think that concept could actually also be applied to the cold conditional. Now, what the cold conditional actually does have comparatively to fire is it seems to creep across a lot more of the map, so your decision making on the move and on the fly has to be a lot more precise, where you're landing if you don't want to be slowed down or cold procced. And yeah, just your movement is a lot more affected. So maybe we won't see periodic cold procs depending on where you are in the ship, but I like where fire has basically come to a kind of conclusion, one could say. I think that the basically where radiation stands right now, if I'm correct, and if we're not seeing the proper effects displayed across the map, then I like where it's at too. I don't think it should be something that is persistent across the entire battlefield, but could change your decision making. There's a pocket of radiation over here that enemies are walking through. That changes the way I make decisions. There's a pocket of radiation, but I have to proceed through this door. That's kind of a forced decision, but it depends upon the mission you're in about how what that forces upon you. Are you going to proceed, or are you just going to maintain your ground until a particular time? I think those are very cool things that really make Warframe help Warframe to continue to be unique. And I would love to see this persist in other fashions. So like, Ceres technically has a persistent conditional where there are just periodic lightning strikes. I like that. However, I would love to see some of that happen on Earth. There is a lightning storm happening on Earth right now, and you have to fight through that. You have to figure out how you're going to fight through this condition. I think that would be very cool. I don't see why that also couldn't apply to Mars. In fact, I almost would love to see a kind of sandstorm like situation on Mars, or if you've seen The Martian, I would love to see a kind of a metal storm. The Martian or Prometheus are kind of great examples of sci-fi displaying these things that happen on these desolate planets where there are these kind of horrifying storms, basically where metals and just debris just are constantly blowing, and I could almost see puncture effects or impact effects happening with these. And again, conditionals are really becoming more powerful, and have become more powerful, and had more kind of, I want to say utility, but I think that's the wrong word, more effect throughout the past year. And again, I really do think there is something to this. And before we move on, I want to come back to like fog. I think fog would be awesome to apply more to Ceres, or a dense fog condition applying on Ceres, Mars. You could even apply these dense fogs on the Corpus tile set, the snow tile set that I'm admittedly kind of sick of, because that's really the only tile set there is for the high-level excavations. Hopefully the Grineer Fortress that will appear on Sedna will have an excavation, fingers crossed. But anyways, moving forward from this, so what we're already seeing here in the background are like enemy conditions. Enemies with elemental and physical enhancements across the entire mission, where you're staggered more. So if you get locked down, you can really get locked down, and that's a huge danger. And you need to find different ways or frames to use to mitigate these effects. And it's awesome to have us thinking outside the box, but that does return me to a comment that I might eventually turn into another ramble or topic. It's the thought of Warframes are supposed to be modular, but we often seem to kind of get in our own way, where we're basically saying, this is my build and I don't really want to adjust it, but some of these conditions, like fire, ask us, well, you could equip this fire resistance mod, and we don't, because it's just like, well, but I want that 15% extra strength. And so, really, I can't help but wonder is there a problem within, the player, myself, and my fellow players, or is this something within the game? Should there be a kind of mission-specific mod slot, potentially? Or should we just be a bit more adaptive than we're allowing ourselves to be at times? I think we need to be more adaptive when it comes to a lot of these things, and part of that might even come down to we need to potentially see more conditionals that really have us thinking outside the box. The ship you are on is passing through a magnetic storm. I believe we've seen magnetic when enemies have an elemental enhancement, which is cool. But I would love to see, like we see radiation, a magnetic storm would be very cool. Now, technically, we already have the condition of the area you are... A void storm is passing through the area you're in, which cuts down your energy significantly. But I think of all the conditionals, that one appeals to me the least because it's not something you really are in. You stand amongst enemies when they have an enhancement. You stand within a radiation leak or a irradiated battlefield. You see the radiation around you, but when there's a void storm, it's just kind of like you don't have as much energy. And of all the ones I think that could stand to use the most improvement, that one stands out to me the most, personally. But when I think of magnetic, I do think of potentially having these magnetic fields that could cut down your energy or remove your energy. Granted, when we're fighting like the Corpus, that often happens to us a lot, but I would love to see Corpus walking through a magnetic area and their shields are just cut in half. Half the time we're, I'm at least eating their health with toxic damage anyways, but I think so there's like a comment in here about damage 3.0. When we get to damage 3.0, we might finally see a time where shields are as good as armor, or possibly even better than armor, and both the Grineer and the Tenno are adapting to better shields. And yeah, that might be the time in which we see the magnetic storms, but these are all kind of cool elements within the game that I would love to see expanded. I would love to see the concept of sabotage with these elemental conditions that we kind of have to sprint to the finish through, expanded on into additional missions. Again, I come back to DevStream 82 in this episode, where I talk about the assault mission that they showed off, where it's a whole bunch of different objectives, and they said it's going to be really long. It's going to be the longest non-endless mission type. And I would be very curious to see what that looks like applied in those mission types, where what if sabotage was also part of a spy mission, where again we kind of start combining these mission types, where assault has the devs looking at missions again, where it doesn't just have to be, well, this is sabotage and all you do is go and sabotage. Instead, okay, you sabotage the reactor. Tenno, I have found out that there are 2 caches of data on this ship that need to be retrieved. You can either proceed to extraction, or you can try to retrieve this data for additional gains. And so you're basically trying to get to these spy vaults through fire and ice. The ice possibly slowing you down on some of these, persistent workarounds that we always use to go through spy vaults. I think these are very cool applications that we already technically see in our gameplay that just could be applied further. I think these are very good things to be talking about. And before we go on this ramble, I also want to talk about enemy conditionals and where those really stand, because that's in the background right now. I like a lot of the enemy conditionals that we see, like this was an enhancement on impact, so if you get staggered, you might stay staggered until you're down, which happened to me quite a few times and was a bit frustrating, but it's a challenge. So like some of the YouTubers, and I won't point to anyone in particular, but a number were kind of pointing to how Rethum, the Corpus version of Rethum, you can do this, Scott. The Index, got it. Woo! That was a close one. The Corpus version of Rethum, the endurance run, was often frustrating because of how difficult it was instead of just challenging. And I do think that these conditionals offer more challenge than frustration. Granted, as I mentioned, and I'm gotta say right here that I tried to get that guy up in the background footage, and I was just pissed because I just grabbed the battery and I thought I was holding down square, but I held down square and picked up a battery and instead didn't revive him, so I felt bad for that, and I wanted my fellow man to know. And so, again, these conditionals, I think, do challenge us more, and while this impact physical enhancement was a bit frustrating at particular moments, like trying to revive or going down, it was more challenging than anything. I used Titania to simply avoid a lot of the shots that the enemies were putting on me. Her 50% evasion and the butterflies also taking some of the shots away from me because they have attack priority, or at least I read that somewhere. And so these are cool. These are cool elements that challenge us. You look at the Halloween alert, even though it's super old, Inaros is a great way to bypass a lot of its challenge where you have very little shield and very little health, and if you go down, your teammates have to revive you, but instead, they can just kill the enemies around you to get you up. Very cool way to challenge yourself in a way that gets you thinking instead of just, you get one shot, and that's frustrating in a game where you do not often get one shot. And I think these kind of enemy conditionals are one of the few answers to how do we make the game more challenging at the highest level without making enemies uber powerful. Granted, there is always a mathematical balance that likely can be achieved. We see this in a lot of external games outside Warframe, and we have even seen this in Warframe where it's just like you reach a particular level of enemy where they're not one-shotting you, but they're doing a lot of damage. You can always... It's like a exponential curve, whether it's down or up. Enemies typically go up in an exponential curve, but it doesn't have to constantly be that exponential curve. It can do an S-shaped curve where that starts to taper off, so the enemies can continue to become stronger in armor, but they don't always have to continue to become stronger in damage. Damage could potentially taper off, and armor could just continue to go up and up to the point where it's just like we can't kill anyone. So like if you're in a survival, if you can't kill anyone, then you really can't persist within the survival environment. Again, very cool concepts to discuss within the game, things that have grown within the game over the past year, and I think things that are, again, worth bringing up in the current state of the game, in the build, to talk with the developers over on forums, in questions for the dev streams, or if you pop into Primetime, Xbox One at 1, or PS4 at 4, things to just talk about with one another. Hope you enjoyed this ramble, and if you liked it, do the thing. We'll move on. Let's move on to the third ramble for this week.